was a typical day on the set of John Wick, where Keanu Reeves and his loyal pit bull buddy were in between scenes. The bustling streets of Brooklyn Heights were alive with the sounds of the city, the air thick with the scent of hot asphalt and street food. The crew had been working tirelessly since dawn, and as the director called for a break, a sense of relief washed over the set. Keanu, usually focused and reserved, found his thoughts drifting to Buddy, who had been a key part of the day's scenes. The dog was panting heavily, his fur shimmering under the bright sun as the heat of the afternoon weighed on him. As the crew began discussing lunch plans, one of them casually called out to Keanu, inviting him to join them for a bite at a nearby deli. But Keanu, ever the animal lover, had other plans. He turned down the offer, his attention fixed on Buddy, who was clearly in need of some rest and a bit of fresh air. The dog keeper, a lanky man with a clipboard, stepped forward to offer his services. But Keanu insisted. He wanted to take Buddy for a walk, just the two of them. It wasn't just about the break, it was about bonding with his co-star, getting to know Buddy better, and forming a deeper connection for their upcoming scenes. There was something special about spending time with the dog, even if it was just for a short walk. After a brief exchange with the dog keeper, who reluctantly agreed to Keanu's request, Keanu gently attached the leash to Buddy's collar. He was excited to take the dog out, perhaps for a peaceful walk, away from the chaos of the set, to explore the streets of Brooklyn Heights and give Buddy the break he deserved. What started as a simple walk, however, would soon lead them into an unexpected confrontation. Keanu Reeves and Buddy, his loyal pit bull, continued their walk through the streets of Brooklyn Heights, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the city. The duo had found a moment of peace away from the chaos of the John Wick set, enjoying the serenity of the neighborhood. As they strolled along the bustling sidewalks, Keanu couldn't help but notice the vibrant energy around him. The streets were alive with the sounds of conversations, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional clang of bicycle bells. The unique charm of Brooklyn Heights, a blend of historic brownstones, trendy cafes, and quiet tree-lined streets, was the perfect backdrop for an afternoon walk. For a brief moment, Keanu allowed himself to simply enjoy the tranquility of it all, his thoughts focused on Buddy's content demeanor as the dog walked alongside him, tail wagging with every step. But the peace was short-lived. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a biker bar called Iron and Ash. Its neon signs flickering in the fading light of day, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycles filled the air, and a row of gleaming bikes lined the entrance like sentinels. Keanu felt a slight tension in the air, the vibe of the place shifting from relaxed to confrontational. And this wasn't the usual hip cafe with artisanal coffee and indie music playing softly in the background. No, this was a different scene altogether, one that exuded an aura of toughness and raw energy. It wasn't exactly Keanu's scene, but it was the kind of place where Buddy would likely feel at ease, surrounded by a mix of people and bikes, far from the controlled environment of the film set. Still, something didn't sit right with Keanu as they approached the entrance. His instincts kicked in, making him aware of the heightened energy around him. The bikers parked outside looked tough, with tattoos covering their arms and weathered faces that spoke of a life lived on the edge. Their heavy boots thudded against the pavement as they casually eyed Keanu and Buddy, their stares lingering just a moment too long. Ooh. It was clear that the bikers weren't exactly thrilled to see the dog in the area, but Keanu tried not to let it bother him. After all, he was just out for a walk with his dog, and the last thing he wanted was to get drawn into a confrontation. As they neared a public water fountain, Keanu's attention was diverted by a glint of metal between two motorcycles. His grip on Buddy's leash tightened instinctively. It was a small sign of unease, a signal that something could be off. Despite the vibe of the place, Keanu decided to stop for a moment and let Buddy drink. The dog was panting heavily in the heat, his tongue lolling out as he searched for any source of relief from the sweltering summer day. Keanu smiled at the sight, pulling out a collapsible water bowl and filling it with cool water from the fountain. As Buddy drank eagerly, Keanu took a moment to survey the surroundings. A few bikers had taken notice of Buddy, and to his surprise, their reactions weren't as hostile as he had expected. One burly man covered in tattoos from head to toe approached and smiled. "Nice pit bull you got there," he said, his voice gravelly but friendly. Keanu was taken aback by the unexpected warmth. "People often misjudge them, you know," the man continued, "kind of like they do with us bikers. Loyal to a fault, both of them, if you treat them right." Keanu nodded, appreciating the biker's words. It was a simple sentiment, but it struck a chord with him. And He had often felt that same misunderstanding both for his dog and himself. It was comforting to hear someone else acknowledge it. Before Keanu could respond, a waitress from the bar came out to greet them, kneeling down to offer Buddy a scratch behind the ears. "Oh, what a handsome boy," she said, her voice light and cheerful. Buddy responded with a lick and the waitress laughed. "Kinder than half the men inside, I'd wager." Keanu chuckled at her comment, appreciating her warmth and the easygoing nature of the exchange. It seemed that Buddy was a hit with the patrons of Iron and Ash despite the intimidating exterior of the place. But as Keanu started to gather his things and prepare to leave, a tense situation began to unfold. Keanu's attention was drawn to the raised voices of several bikers arguing with the waitress. She stood her ground, her posture defensive but firm as she argued. "Your gang's not welcome here anymore," she said. The situation quickly escalated as one of the bikers, a hulking man with a shaved head, stepped forward and growled, "Move aside, sweetheart, or we'll move you ourselves." The words were venomous, and the tension in the air was palpable. Keanu's protective instincts flared. He looked down at Buddy, who was still drinking, unaware of the conflict brewing nearby. Keanu hesitated, torn, between stepping in to help and ensuring that Buddy remained safe. Before he could make a move, a group of other bikers emerged from the bar, positioning themselves between the waitress and the aggressors. "You heard the lady," one of them said, his voice low and menacing. "Time for you to leave." The situation was on the verge of violence, and Keanu knew it was time to leave. He gently tugged on Buddy's leash and led the dog away, choosing not to escalate the confrontation. The last thing he wanted was to put Buddy in danger. And with that, they quietly retreated from the scene, making their way to a quieter part of Brooklyn Heights. Though Keanu was relieved to have avoided a confrontation, the experience left him unsettled. The incident with the bikers was a reminder of how quickly things could escalate, even in the most unexpected places. As they continued their walk, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on the rising tension in the neighborhood, wondering how it would all unfold. Keanu Reeves and Buddy had just escaped the heavy tension outside Iron and Ash, the biker bar, when they decided to seek solace in a quiet cafe a few blocks away. The streets of Brooklyn Heights had calmed, the hustle and bustle of the city fading into a soft hum as the sun began to dip behind the skyline. It seemed like the perfect moment to regroup. Keanu could unwind, and Buddy could finally relax after the anxiety of their encounter with the bikers. They reached the quaint cafe, its outdoor seating area inviting with cozy iron tables and string lights crisscrossing overhead, adding a whimsical touch to the otherwise urban atmosphere. The cafe's calm environment was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just experienced. Keanu, exhausted but grateful for the brief respite, approached an empty table and gently removed Buddy's leash. He patted the seat next to him, inviting Buddy to settle down. The dog, still a little on edge from the tension at the bar, hesitated for a moment before gracefully jumping onto the chair beside Keanu, curling up comfortably. The friendly warmth of the cafe patrons, who smiled affectionately at the dog, helped ease the tension in the air. Just as Keanu began to relax, a waitress named Maggie approached, her demeanor warm and inviting. She noticed Buddy sitting beside Keanu and immediately complimented him. "Aren't you a handsome fellow?" Buddy responded with a friendly lick, his tail wagging lightly. Keanu smiled, appreciating the easygoing interaction. "He certainly is," Keanu replied, his voice soft and calm. "I hope it's all right that he's with me here." Maggie waved off any concerns, assuring Keanu that as long as Buddy behaved, they were more than welcome. With a friendly wink, she took their order. Keanu asked for a coffee and a steak sandwich, and with a slight chuckle, he added, "Could I get an extra steak portion for my four-legged friend here?" Buddy perked up at the mention of food, his ears twitching in anticipation. Maggie laughed, clearly amused by the friendly banter, and promised to bring their order out shortly. The moment seemed to slow down. Keanu settled back in his chair, feeling the weight of the day lifting. He took out his script from his jacket pocket, flipping through the pages, mentally preparing for the next scene. He alternated between reviewing his lines and giving Buddy the occasional affectionate pat. It was a peaceful interlude, an oasis of calm in the middle of an unexpected day, but peace is often fleeting, and it was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. Without warning, a burly man in a biker vest, one who had clearly had a bit too much to drink, stumbled past their table. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at Buddy, and in an instant, his face twisted with contempt. "Filthy animals," he muttered loud enough for Keanu to hear. Before Keanu could react, the man's boot lashed out, striking Buddy hard in the side. The impact sent Buddy yelping in pain, his body jerking as he let out a defensive growl, quickly followed by frantic barking. The peaceful cafe, which had just moments ago been a sanctuary, erupted into chaos. The sudden attack on Buddy left everyone frozen for a split second before patrons began to react. Keanu's body stiffened, a surge of rage and protectiveness flooding through him. The dog, clearly startled, was trying to defend himself, his growls and barks becoming more frantic. Keanu stood up in a flash, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, eyes blazing with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Keanu's voice was low but dangerous, the calm demeanor he'd held moments ago gone in an instant. His hand instinctively reached for Buddy's back, offering a calming touch, but his eyes never left the man who had attacked. The biker, momentarily stunned by Keanu's quick reaction, sneered. "Control your beast," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "How dare it show its teeth to a man?" Keanu's hands balled into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening. "Buddy only reacts to threats," Keanu retorted, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "You're the one who provoked him. He's never hurt anyone. Unless they hurt him first." "All right." The confrontation escalated quickly, and the cafe patrons were beginning to stir, murmurs of unease rising as the tension in the air grew thicker. Keanu's instincts kicked in and he stepped forward, his calm demeanor slipping. He grabbed the front of the biker's vest in one swift motion, his fingers curling around the leather, pulling the man closer to his face. The action was so sudden and forceful that it left the onlookers gasping in shock. For a brief moment, it felt as though everything hung in the balance. Keanu's controlled anger, the biker's hostility, and the growing crowd of people watching the spectacle unfold. But just as quickly as he had grabbed the man, Keanu let go. His trained actor's mind caught up with the situation, and he realized that what was happening could escalate further, drawing even more attention and making things worse. The biker, sensing Keanu's restraint, took advantage of the moment, using his anger to fuel his next words. "Coward! Dog! Coward owner!" he taunted, his words laced with venom. Keanu's expression remained unflinching, but the words hit harder than any physical blow could have. He didn't react immediately, though, instead allowing the tension to settle before he spoke again. "You'll pay for this," the biker snarled, turning on his heel and storming off, his boots pounding the ground in anger as he retreated. As the biker disappeared into the crowd, Keanu turned back to Buddy, his heart pounding in his chest. The dog, although still shaken, seemed to calm as Keanu knelt beside him, checking for any signs of injury. Relieved that Buddy appeared to be okay, Keanu exhaled slowly. But the anger inside him didn't subside. It was clear that this incident wasn't over, and Keanu's mind raced with thoughts of justice for his beloved companion. The day had taken a dark turn, and Keanu wasn't going to let it end here. Keanu's mind raced as the biker's hateful words echoed in his ears. He stood frozen for a moment, his body still tense as the chaotic scene in the cafe slowly began to settle. The biker had stormed off, but the damage had already been done. The attack on Buddy had ignited something deep within Keanu, something raw and protective. It wasn't just the physical strike on his dog that set him off. It was the sheer disrespect and malice behind it. Buddy was more than just a pet to him. He was family, and Keanu wasn't about to let anyone get away with hurting him. His heart still pounded in his chest as he scanned the cafe, making sure Buddy was okay. The dog was still a little shaken, but his tail wagged weakly, offering Keanu a small measure of comfort. Keanu knelt beside Buddy, gently stroking his fur, his mind already spinning with what had just happened. The man had been a bully, trying to intimidate both him and his dog in front of a crowd. But it wasn't just an isolated act. It was part of something larger, something more sinister. Keanu's thoughts turned back to the earlier encounter outside Iron and Ash, the bikers, the hostility in the air. It all felt connected. The pieces began to fall into place. The bikers' behavior wasn't just about Buddy. This was about a group that had been terrorizing the neighborhood, using intimidation and violence to get their way. Keanu knew the biker who had kicked Buddy was part of that group. He could feel it in his bones. They were all connected, and that made everything personal. Keanu wasn't just going to walk away from this. Not when there was a threat lurking in the shadows. Not when Buddy was still hurting. As he stood up and turned toward the entrance, Keanu's jaw clenched with determination. He wasn't going to let the man get away with it, not after everything that had happened. He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, but he kept it in check. Keanu was no stranger to confrontation, but he had always prided himself on keeping his cool. Today, though, something had shifted. The attack on Buddy had unleashed a side of him that was harder to control. He wasn't about to let this go. He started walking toward the door of the cafe, his eyes scanning the crowd outside. As he stepped into the street, his gaze locked onto the group of bikers still lingering around the bar. They were laughing, joking, oblivious to the tension that Keanu was feeling. The sight of them, their arrogant grins and swaggering steps, only fueled his sense of justice. They were causing trouble in the neighborhood, making life miserable for the people who lived here. Keanu wasn't going to stand by and let them do whatever they wanted without consequences. But he also knew that going in guns blazing wasn't the smartest move. Keanu was aware of the risks. He wasn't just an ordinary guy trying to protect his dog anymore. He was Keanu Reeves, a well-known actor with a public persona, and confronting a biker gang in broad daylight would only escalate things. The last thing he wanted was for this to turn into a public spectacle. But the situation was too volatile for him to just walk away. His instincts screamed at him to take action, but he knew he had to be strategic. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Should he confront them directly, or should he bide his time, find another way to handle it? As he watched the bikers from across the street, Keanu's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the cafe's employee. The man had approached him again, his face pale, his voice shaky. "Keanu," he said, his eyes darting nervously to the bikers. You can't do this. These guys, they're dangerous. You don't know what they're capable of." Keanu looked at him, his expression hardening. "I know exactly what they're capable of, and I'm not just going to stand by and let them hurt people. Let them hurt Buddy!" The employee took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They've been causing trouble for months. People are scared. They own this place. They own the neighborhood. If you go after them, if you make a move, they'll come for you." Keanu's gaze flicked toward the bikers once more, and he felt the weight of the decision settle in his chest. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. This wasn't just about Buddy anymore. This was about standing up against a group that had terrorized a whole community, a group that had gotten away with far too much for too long. Keanu took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. He wasn't about to back down now. "Then I'll do what I have to do," he said, his voice calm but determined. "I won't let them get away with this." His decision was made. Keanu knew he couldn't confront them head on, not without backup. But he also knew that he couldn't let them continue to hurt people. The anger that had been simmering inside him was now focused, fueled by a sense of justice. He had to stop this, for Buddy, for the community, and for himself. As he walked away from the cafe, his phone already in hand, Keanu dialed the number he knew he could trust. It was time to call in the cavalry. Keanu Reeves' mind was in overdrive as he rushed toward the veterinary clinic, Buddy cradled in his arms, his body limp and struggling to breathe. The sight of Buddy, once so full of energy and life, now weak and unresponsive, was a constant gnawing reminder of the violence that had just occurred. The air around Keanu felt thick, the streets of Brooklyn Heights blurring as he sprinted through them, his feet pounding the pavement, sweat beating down his forehead, his heart hammered in his chest, not just from the exertion of carrying Buddy, but from the frantic worry that gnawed at him with each passing second. Every moment mattered, and with each stride, he knew they were running out of time. Keanu's thoughts were a whirlpool of fear and anger, both of which he had trouble controlling. He hadn't planned for any of this. His walk with Buddy had been meant to be a simple break from the chaos of the film set. But that had all changed the moment the biker had kicked his dog. Now, it wasn't just about Buddy's immediate well-being. It was about ensuring that whoever had poisoned him would face justice. Keanu's protective instincts surged again, but this time, the stakes were higher. He had to get Buddy to safety, but the road ahead felt long, each second feeling like an eternity as he pushed himself harder to reach the clinic. People on the sidewalk stared, some pausing to watch the man carrying the large pit bull in his arms, but Keanu didn't care. His focus was entirely on Buddy, on getting to the clinic, on making sure his four-legged companion was going to be okay. Every step was filled with dread, the weight of the situation pressing down on him, and yet his pace never slowed. Keanu had always prided himself on keeping his cool, on being able to manage whatever challenges came his way, but this this was different. This wasn't just a movie scene, and Buddy wasn't just a co-star. He was family. The veterinary clinic loomed ahead, its stark white facade and blue cross sign a beacon of hope. But even as Keanu saw it, he knew it wasn't the end of the line. It was just another hurdle they had to clear. With the clinic now only a block away, Keanu's fear intensified. What if it was too late? What if the poison had taken too much of a toll? The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself harder, determination clouding his judgment. He wouldn't lose, Buddy. Not like this. Finally, Keanu burst through the doors of the clinic, his voice hoarse with panic as he called out, "Please! I need help! My dog's been poisoned!" The reception area erupted into action at his words. A nurse jumped from behind the counter, a woman in scrubs with her name tag reading, "Dr. Harper," quickly taking charge. She guided Keanu to an examination room, her voice calm and authoritative as she led him through the doors. "Put him on the table," she instructed, her demeanor unwavering as she assessed the situation. Keanu gently laid Buddy on the cold metal table, his hands shaking slightly. The dog's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in a desperate rhythm. Dr. Harper immediately began her examination, her movements swift and practiced, her eyes scanning Buddy's condition with focused intensity. Keanu hovered by the side of the table, unable to tear his eyes away from his dog, his stomach twisting into knots. "Can you tell me what happened?" Dr. Harper asked, glancing up briefly as she worked. Keanu recounted the events as best he could, his voice tight with worry. Someone fed him something. A sausage. It must have been laced with something. He started choking, and then he just collapsed. His words tumbled out in a rush, fueled by the terror that had settled in his chest. Dr. Harper nodded, her face serious but not grim. "The symptoms you're describing are consistent with poisoning. We'll need to run some tests to identify the substance. It looks like he's been exposed to something serious, maybe even drug." She turned to the nurse. "We need blood tests now, and we'll start treatment immediately." Keanu felt a surge of relief. At least they were doing something. At least there was hope. He watched as the team worked efficiently, administering fluids and charcoal to neutralize the poison. His mind couldn't stop racing, the worst-case scenarios running through his head. But for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to hope. They were doing everything they could to save Buddy, and for that, he was thankful. But even as the treatment began, a gnawing fear tugged at him. Who could have done this? And why? As the minutes passed, Keanu stepped back to the waiting area, his mind not on the sterile environment, but on the events that had led them here. The bikers, the confrontation, the moment Buddy had been poisoned. All of it pointed back to the same group. Keanu could feel it in his gut. He couldn't just sit idly by. This wasn't over. Whoever had done this to Buddy wasn't just going to get away with it. The reality of the situation settled in like a stone in his stomach. He needed answers. He needed to find out who was responsible for Buddy's poisoning, but right now, all he could do was wait. Wait and hope that the veterinary team's efforts would be enough to save his dog. The door to the examination room opened after what felt like an eternity, and Dr. Harper entered with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was still serious, but there was a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Mr. Reeves," she said, sitting down next to him, "Buddy is stable for now. We're not out of the woods yet, but he's responding to the treatment. It's still too early to know if there's any lasting damage. But he's hanging in there." Keanu let out a long, shaky breath. The worst was over. For now. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as he sat there, waiting for news on Buddy's condition, his thoughts turned to the bikers and the dark shadow they had cast over the neighborhood. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Keanu Reeves paced nervously in the waiting room of the veterinary clinic, his eyes flicking from the door to the clock on the wall. Each minute felt like an eternity. Buddy was still in the treatment room, under observation after the poison had been flushed from his system. The pit bull, once full of life and energy, now lay motionless on a table, tethered to IV fluids and a slew of monitoring equipment. Keanu's thoughts raced, but they were always drawn back to the same question. Who did this to Buddy? What kind of person could poison an innocent animal just to cause pain and suffering? As Keanu sat there, his anger simmering beneath the surface, the events from earlier in the day flooded his mind. The confrontation outside the Iron and Ash bar, the biker who had provoked Buddy, the unsettling feeling that something was terribly wrong. It all felt like one piece of a larger, more sinister puzzle. It wasn't just the lone biker who had attacked Buddy, it was the entire biker gang. The people who had come together under the banner of intimidation, bullying, and violence. It was clear now that they weren't just a group of rowdy individuals, they were a force to be reckoned with. Running roughshod over the people in their community, Keanu leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. The image of the biker who had kicked Buddy replayed in his mind, a cold rage creeping into his chest. It wasn't enough that they had threatened a waitress, harassed the staff, or intimidated the neighborhood. Now they had gone too far. Poisoning a dog was a line that shouldn't have been crossed. And Keanu wasn't about to let it slide. It wasn't just about Buddy anymore. This was about justice. It was about sending a message that actions like this wouldn't be tolerated, not on his watch. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chime of his phone. It was a message from Sheriff Hank Morrison, the man Keanu had called earlier to help handle the bikers. The text was brief, but to the point. Operation successful. All suspects in custody. Evidence secured. Your involvement remains confidential. Well done, Keanu. Keanu's heart skipped a beat as relief washed over him. The authorities had finally moved in. The bikers, the very men who had tormented the community, were behind bars. It was a victory, a significant one. But as Keanu read the message again, a nagging feeling settled in his gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Despite the relief of knowing the bikers had been arrested, Keanu still felt the weight of the day pressing on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more to the story than what had happened so far. The police had caught the bikers, but what about the masterminds behind the operation? The person who had laced Buddy's food with poison? Keanu wasn't ready to rest until he knew who was ultimately responsible for the damage they had caused. He was pulled from his thoughts by the soft sound of footsteps. The door to the treatment room opened, and Dr. Harper stepped out, her expression unreadable. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. This was the moment he'd been dreading. He stood up quickly, his pulse racing. "How is he?" Keanu asked, his voice tight. Dr. Harper smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. "Buddy is stable. He's responding to the treatment, but he's not out of the woods yet. We've got him on IV fluids, and the antidote is working, but we need to monitor him closely for the next 24 hours. Keanu's shoulders slumped with relief. Buddy wasn't out of danger yet, but he wasn't hanging on. "Thank you," Keanu said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." Your Harper nodded, her professional demeanor softening. "You're welcome. Just make sure you follow the aftercare instructions carefully. We'll keep him under observation for a while, but I'm confident he'll make a full recovery." As Dr. Harper walked away to tend to another patient, Keanu took a moment to process everything that had happened. But he was going to be okay, but the anger that had been building inside him refused to be contained. The bikers might be behind bars, but the real question remained, who had sent them after Buddy? Who was behind this twisted plot? Keanu's instincts told him it wasn't over. This wasn't just about a random act of cruelty. It was part of something larger, something that had been brewing for a long time, and Keanu wasn't going to let it rest. As he stood there, watching the clock tick away, he knew he had to keep pushing, keep seeking answers. It wasn't just about Buddy's recovery anymore. It was about exposing the people who thought they could act without consequence. The real fight, Keanu realized, was just beginning. Keanu Reeves stood outside the veterinary clinic, his fingers gripping his phone with a sense of urgency. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but he knew he couldn't let the weight of the day cloud his judgment. Buddy, his loyal pit bull, was stable for now. But Keanu's mind was still reeling from the chain of events that had led them here. The bikers, the poison, the violence, it all felt like an unrelenting storm that had been building for months. And Keanu had unknowingly stepped right into its eye. His thoughts drifted back to the confrontation earlier at Iron and Ash, the biker bar where it all started. The thug who had kicked Buddy, the group of aggressive bikers hanging around the bar, and the way they'd threatened the waitress. All of it felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. Keanu had spent enough time on the streets, enough time in this neighborhood, to recognize when something wasn't right. These weren't just a group of rowdy bikers, they were part of something bigger, something darker. And Keanu wasn't the type to just sit back and let that kind of thing slide. But as much as he wanted to rush in, confront the bikers, and make them pay for what they'd done, Keanu knew he had to be smart. He wasn't just a man off the street anymore, he was a public figure, and any wrong move could escalate the situation. No, he had to handle this with precision. The pieces were falling into place, and Keanu could feel it. Whoever was behind this had to be stopped, not just for Buddy's sake, but for the sake of everyone else who lived in the community, who had been terrorized by these bikers for far too long. Keanu's mind snapped back to the present as his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sheriff Hank Morrison, the man he had called earlier to help take care of the situation. The message was short but to the point. Operation complete, all suspects in custody, evidence secured. You were right to reach out. It's over for them. Let me know if you need anything else. Keanu allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The bikers had been arrested, their violent streak contained for the moment, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. This wasn't the end, not yet. Keanu knew better than anyone that some problems couldn't be solved in one go. And while the bikers were behind bars for now, the mastermind behind Buddy's poisoning was still out there. And so, in the meantime, the message from Hank was reassuring, but Keanu's instincts told him that this wasn't just about cleaning up a few bad apples. It was about exposing the network of violence and corruption that was festering beneath the surface. Keanu took a deep breath, steadying himself before dialing the number he knew he could trust. The phone rang for a few moments, and then Hank's voice came through, steady and calm. "Keanu," the sheriff said, his voice a calm anchor amidst the chaos. "What's going on? You're on my radar now. I've got eyes everywhere, but I need to know how deep this goes." Keanu didn't waste time. "Hank, I need you to look into Iron and Ash. Those bikers, they're not just causing trouble, they're part of something bigger. This isn't just about a few rogue guys acting out. There's a network here. The bikers are a front, and I'm betting that the person who poisoned Buddy is tied into all of it." Hank was silent for a moment, processing what Keanu had said. "I hear you, but I can't go in guns blazing without proof. I need something solid, an angle I can work with. I can make this stick, but you're gonna have to help me get the ball rolling." Keanu's jaw clenched. He wasn't going to let this go, not now. "I'm not asking for revenge, Hank. I'm asking for justice. These people need to be held accountable before they hurt anyone else." Another long pause on the line before Hank spoke again. "All right, I'll get my team on it. You stay put for now. We'll dig deeper, see what we can find. I've got a couple of connections inside that biker world, but I'll need you to be careful, Keanu. This could get ugly." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'm already in this deep. I'll keep my head low and stay out of sight, but don't let up. These people need to face what they've done." The call ended with a final exchange of brief words, and Keanu stood there for a moment, staring at the city street in front of him. The shadows of the building stretched long as the sun dipped lower in the sky, and the weight of the day seemed to hang heavier on him than ever. The bikers had been arrested, but Keanu wasn't done. The fight wasn't over. This wasn't just a battle to save Buddy. It was a battle to ensure that no one else would suffer at the hands of this criminal network. As he walked away from the clinic, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was unfolding, something far beyond what he had anticipated. He wasn't going to let this slide. Whoever was behind this, whoever thought they could get away with hurting his dog and terrorizing this community, would soon know that Keanu Reeves wasn't someone you messed with. The storm was just beginning, and Keanu would be ready. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the police barricade, staring at the scene unfolding before him. The flashing lights of police cars illuminated the area around Iron and Ash, casting eerie glows on the faces of the gathered onlookers. He could hear the muffled voices of officers as they moved methodically through the bar, collecting evidence and taking statements. The bikers who had terrorized the neighborhood for months were being led away in handcuffs, their once intimidating demeanor now deflated in the face of the law. For the first time in what felt like forever, Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him. The bikers were behind bars, and Buddy was recovering. Justice, in some form, had been served. But even as the authorities did their work, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The bikers were just the tip of the iceberg. He had seen enough in his time in the public eye to know that there was often more lurking beneath the surface than what met the eye. This wasn't just about a gang of troublemakers causing a ruckus. It was about a network of violence and intimidation that reached far deeper. And Keanu had barely scratched the surface. As he stood there, watching the police do their job, Keanu's mind couldn't help but return to the pivotal moment when Buddy had been poisoned. The biker who had kicked Buddy, the one who had escalated the situation, was only a part of the puzzle. Someone had been pulling the strings. Someone who was willing to go to extreme lengths to maintain control and strike fear into those who dared to stand against them. Keanu's protective instincts had kicked in the moment he saw Buddy in distress, but now that things had calmed down, the realization that this wasn't a random act of violence settled heavily on him. This wasn't just a crime against one dog, it was a crime against the entire community. Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sheriff Hank Morrison, who had been instrumental in organizing the bust. "The bikers have been arrested. We've got their stash. It's bigger than we thought. Drugs, weapons, all of it tied to iron and ash. But there's more. Someone higher up is involved. Keep your eyes open. This isn't over." Keanu's heart skipped a beat as he read the message. The adrenaline from earlier had worn off, but this new development sent a jolt of urgency through him. He had known there had to be more to it. No gang operates in isolation, and the fact that there was an even bigger player behind the scenes made the situation even more complicated. Keanu had done his part by bringing attention to the issue, by stepping in when the bikers crossed the line, but now it seemed like the real fight was just beginning. He exhaled deeply, the weight of the situation pressing down on him again. He had come here to protect Buddy, to ensure that the dog he had grown so attached to would make it through. But now, he found himself facing a larger, more dangerous conflict. The people behind the bikers, the ones who had orchestrated the violence and the poisoning, were still out there, still free to continue their operations. Keanu walked away from the scene, his mind racing with questions. Who was pulling the strings? Was this really just about power and intimidation, or was there something deeper at play? Was Buddy's poisoning part of a larger scheme to send a message, or had they simply targeted him because of his connection to the film set? And more importantly, what would Keanu do now? He had already risked so much to ensure Buddy's safety, but the fight had only just begun. The network behind these bikers wasn't going to crumble with just a few arrests. Keanu knew that if he wanted to make a real difference, he couldn't back down now. As Keanu headed back to the clinic to check on Buddy, he couldn't help but wonder where this would all lead. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the full picture remained unclear. What would happen next? Could Keanu take down this network before it destroyed everything he cared about? And what was his role in all of this now? Was he simply a concerned pet owner caught up in a larger fight, or had he become something more, a symbol of resistance, willing to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost? What do you think about the story so far? Is Keanu's involvement in the situation driven purely by a sense of justice, or is it also about something deeper? And do you believe that tackling such a large, complex issue can be solved with just a few arrests, or is there more that needs to be done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.